Afternoon, everyone.
Michael, with Jake obviously missing 2 kicks, how do you go about that moving forward? Is there any thoughts about trying somebody out, or is it full steam ahead?
No, I just full steam ahead. Obviously love him up, keep his confidence up. Obviously he's hit a lot of big kicks for this franchise. Some big kicks this year also. So just keep pushing ahead, full steam ahead with him, and just keep loving him up as we move forward, because it's going to come down to a point where we're going to have to call on him, and he's shown that he can do it.
What do you think, from your perspective, is causing his inconsistency or his struggles?
Yeah, I think just a lot of it, has to do with just maybe just a little bit of the line he wants to choose and everything. But I don't think there's too much to go into it. Obviously, I'm not a kicker, but he obviously, you're not in the NFL for 9+ years if you don't know how to self-correct. But I think nobody's going to be more disappointed than him, and how much of a competitor he is. He'll be able to we got a great practice in today. Get back on the horse and move forward going into a hostile environment of Buffalo.
Nick talked about his ability to kind of get out of situations that like he's been in before. In those moments, what do you see from him behind the scenes that lets you know he's going to pull through?
Yeah, obviously, he had that spell last year where he was able to pull through for us at the end of the season. Obviously, hitting those big kicks in the Super Bowl. But again, it's just more kudos to him on how he trains and how he prepares himself to, one, mentally be strong enough to get out of that, then physically be able to perform. So just being around him, for the last 5 years, for myself, I'm not going to treat him any differently than when he first got here, and that 23 season where he was magnificent. Last year when he pulled through, this year when he's going to pull through, you just don't treat anybody any differently. You treat him the same way. You love him up and get his confidence going. I know there's nobody better for us right now than Jake.
What was your assessment of the special teams performance overall?
It's been some ups and downs. I think our kickoff coverage has been a huge proponent for us. They're doing a really good job. I think our punt coverage after that first New York Giants game has really turned the page. I think since week 12 or week 11, something like that, I think we've only been giving up about 0.9 yards of return. Obviously going against a couple dangerous returners, and McCole Hardman and Khalil Shakir. So I think there's some good stuff. Obviously, clean up some of that kickoff return. Obviously, we can't put the ball on the ground, put our defense in a bad spot. Obviously, Vic and the defense did a heck of a job to hold them to 3. Then you've seen some added juice, with Covey coming back in the punt return. I think he's at 12 yards of return. I think we're at like 11-1 on the season. So getting that first down. So I think there's been some ups and downs. Obviously, some stuff that's not good enough in the NFL. But I thought they've battled hard, and we've done some good stuff in the coverage phase.
How about as far as Shipley goes? Same approach with loving him up and fumbles, and then you had that indecision coming out of the end zone on one play.
Yeah, sometimes you got to chalk it up to the game. Mikey Sandstrom made a heck of a play in terms of that. Will was just trying to finish the return there, but again, just love him up and keep going. He came back. Obviously after the fumble, had a nice return out to the 33. And again, it's one of those things where you try to tell these guys, you're almost like a duck. Keep the water off your feathers right there, let it roll off your back, and next play in. I thought the second half of the Washington game, the guys battled hard and did some good stuff in the coverage phase, giving our defense a longer field. Covey did some really good stuff in the +50, catching that ball at the 17, letting the one go in the end zone right there. So being able to, almost like a cornerback, let it go and play the next play, then, we'll get to the problems the next day. And obviously it's easier to fix those problems after a win.
The coaching point on the one where he got caught halfway in the end zone, halfway up.
Yeah, obviously we want to have the communication back there with Covey and Will. And I think it was just more of those indecisive. Am I in the end zone? Do I have to return this? Not. Obviously, hindsight 2020, if we could have it back, he'd just take the knee in right there. But again, just some communication and just trusting it. Hey, if you're going to go out full speed, you don't want to be in that indecision because it just messes up the timing for those guys blocking on the front line.
How much have kickers had to change their jobs this year because of the last 2 years because of the rules and focus on the kickoff part of things? Is it a more time-consuming job than it used to be?
I don't know if it's a more time-consuming job. I think if you're trying to hit those specialty knuckleballs, obviously you are going to spend a little bit more time. But again, sometimes you just play the elements. Obviously, if you have a wind behind you, you don't have to take a hard swing and let it go through. When the wind is in your face, you're going to have to maybe go back to your regular 5-step approach. But I think a lot of it, especially here in the Northeast for those kickers, is predicated off the wind. But I don't think it's too much of a change for these kickers in terms of this new, kickoff style.
Would you say that Jake's done a good job in adjusting to that rule?
Yeah, absolutely. He's helped us out with the location and the depth of the ball. He's shown that he can hit, the Tampa Bay game, the Minnesota game, he had a couple of specialty kicks right there. And, he's given our guys on kickoff coverage, the ability to go out there and cover, and they've done a really good job with that, especially, Jeremiah Trotter's done a really good job from that kickoff coverage standpoint.
He's been a pretty good punt returner in prior years, but where have you seen him grow since he's taken over the role this year again? And I guess, yeah.
Just being more vocal. Obviously when you're first and second year, you think, I can't be vocal. I think in this third year, he's seen a lot of football, a lot of different punts. He's a lot more vocal with these guys, and he's trying to take those young guys under his wing. Obviously, you see, Will, Trot, Smile, they're first and second year guys, and just letting them get in the brain of Britton Covey, what he sees and how he wants blocks in that way. So just being more vocal, which is awesome to see.
When you look at, looking ahead to Buffalo, obviously the weather could be a big factor on Sunday, depending on what the wind, snow and rain and all that. How do you guys, you and Jake, kind of approach, your strategy, for kicking and everything in that game?
Yeah, you embrace it, first of all. Obviously both teams got a kick in it. Then you kind of go back, the cool thing is, I believe it was 2018 that the Eagles played Buffalo there, and we were just kind of looking at the win and watching that film. What was it doing? Things of that nature. Then obviously having Braden, who was in the AFC East for a couple of years, he played in some windy games and getting just their feedback. Hey, this is where the wind's coming, where it's going. This is what a good punt is. With this, where can we take advantage of that? So getting their knowledge, their feedback from playing in it, then just kind of devising a game plan and understanding. Mother Nature's undefeated. You can't get down on yourself if, something bad happens in terms of the wind, doesn't allow the ball to go more than 40 yards. Hey, we'll go out there and get the next one when we do have the wind at that case. So just understanding that we got to embrace the situation, embrace the conditions, then go out there and give our team the best way in terms of flipping the field position.
As a coverage guy, what can you tell us about Keele, Pro Bowl alternate, what he went through this year, fighting for a spot on defense and then sort of coming back? What have you seen from him throughout the season?
Yeah, it's very similar to Britton Covey, the growth, being in his third year, seeing a little bit different than, I give a lot of credit to Tyler Brown. He works with those guys on the outside with Sidney and Keele, and just working their technique. The technician phase of his releases have gone exponentially better. Obviously you can't teach speed. Obviously he's a track guy, but his tackling in the open space at a high rate has been really good. And now he's understanding where to fit on kickoff coverage, where to fit on punt gunner. He's doing an unbelievable job in that case, and it's helping out our coverage. Then I think where he really shines and excels at is that punt return phase. We put a lot on his plate to allow him to be on an island out there, and he does a really good job against some pretty good gunners. Last week against Tyler Owens, who's one of the better gunners in the league, he did a really good job of holding his own. So it's more, all the credit goes to the players in here, all their film study, their techniques. But, Keele's done a really good job for us. I'm happy for him. Obviously, get that Pro Bowl alternate, and he knows he wants to strive, and he's outstanding on game days in terms of being vocal, what he sees out there. So again, all the credit goes to Keele.
What stands out about Buffalo's special teams?
They're very physical. I know Taves, he's done a really good job with that. You can see, they got some guys out there. Solomon, number 56, 42. I think his name's Dorian Thomas. Andreessen, the local kid, they're doing an unbelievable job playing off each other. Then Marshall on the outside as a gunner. I know he's familiar with Taves from the Carolina, but they're playing with some good physicality, and their kickoff return game has been outstanding. Ray Davis, I know he started here at Temple, then ended up at Kentucky. He's doing an unbelievable job with their blocking. So we got our work cut out in the conditions, to stop them from being an explosive team like they have shown over the past probably month.
Given some of the inconsistencies you guys had in the return game earlier in the year, do you wish you had gone to Britton earlier, and what do you think led to not going to him so late in the season?
Yeah, again, that's more for, the greater good of the team and all the decisions that Howie, Nick, myself make in terms of that. And again, I take it week by week. I'll take any player, what they give me at that point. I'm going to work it. I'm not going to say yes, no, maybe so. I'm going to make sure I get all these guys ready regardless of who it is.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.